Well, good day. I'm Dean Jones, President and CEO of RealLogic Sotheby's International Realty, and this is Market Perspectives. I am so excited to have two market luminaries with me, and you're not both just fantastic realtors, but you're also our steering committee members, and I thank you for your service. Michele Schuler and Jay Kipp, it's a blast to have you on board. We're going to talk about some nuggets in the market that might not be commonplace, might not be in the headlines where you see the trend lines on the front lines. So let's talk about a few things that you think might be moving the market right now. It's been decades of these low volumes. We just kind of feel stuck right now. I mean, just 4 million transactions across the U.S. in the last year. Are you starting to see, Michele, the market pick up? And if so, what do you think's driving that?
Yeah, I think there's been a dramatic pickup in buyer activity this year, and which we're of course thrilled to see. And I think it's that buyers have been sitting on the sidelines, just waiting for rates to drop, waiting for something to happen, waiting for more inventory to come on, waiting for I don't know, something critical to happen. And they're realizing that now's the time. Like things are not going to change. That we will see interest rates drop hopefully this year.
Yep.
And they have some anticipation. They see something more positive on the horizon. I think here locally, people's portfolios are just
the stock market is doing really well.
Yeah, so that's really helping people open up their pocketbook and feel like they can make an investment in real estate and realizing they want to call this home.
Right.
So we're seeing, our activity in our listings and at our open houses is just overwhelming.
So someone rang a bell in the new year maybe and said, this will be the year I'm going to get off this 3% mortgage perhaps and maybe go buy something. Jay, what are you finding?
I think that as we move into the middle part of spring here in 2024, at least what we had happen in 2023 was the first half of the year was okay, and then rates really got beyond what folks had anticipated. If we go back one full calendar year, there was an expectation that rates were going to go up and stabilize, but they moved beyond that expectation.
Right.
And by the third quarter, certainly the fourth quarter, activity had ground to a halt. And whether it's now is the time to buy or you got to make decisions in your life and the world keeps turning,
right.
Rates have dropped a little bit and a lot of that's been digested back into the market. And so, we've got a little bit of a pent up demand on the buy side, some supply releasing with sellers who now know they need to be moving, are motivated, they're ready to go.
Right.
And that's all unleashing it at the same time. And so, we're off to a pretty strong start this spring.
I liked what you said about sort of priced into the market. And really, I think there has been some correction in some product types and price points. And let's remind the audience that real estate is not a macro relationship, right? I mean, real estate microclimates exist, and you could have a very different reality at a price point or product type or neighborhood from place to place. But overall, I mean, S&P Case-Shiller just came out. And yes, they're reporting full numbers for 2023. All 20 metro areas have seen now year-over-year price inclines. Do you think this is the inflection point, or do you think there's any more erosion to happen in metro area pricing? Michele?
I think this is it. I think we're there. I think we're actually seeing this uptick now in prices, and I expect to see that continue nominally so. So we're not going to see the price increases that we saw back in 2021, 22.
Sure.
We're going to see moderated price appreciation, but I think we're definitely there. And I think that's what a lot of the buyers were doing, is waiting on the sidelines for the market to crash.
Well, who's gonna buy if they think they're catching a falling knife, right? Unless it's super unique real estate, and there's always those opportunities out there. But this sort of buy then refi mentality is coming in, Jay. Are you finding that buyers understand they might be paying 100, 150 basis points over for their temporary infliction of this mortgage interest rate, but the strike price might be the more important number to focus on?
Yeah, you can look at a home value curve over time or national, average prices of home values, and that's the curve to be worried about. It's far outpaced household income. Rates go up and down, and there's a component of just general affordability that, you've got to get into the property. And if there is an opportunity to refinance down the road, great. But I see a lot of buyers certainly cognizant that they need to be buying the property, and that's the first goal. Certainly be prepared for the rate you purchase at, the rate you lock at. But I think Jerome Powell said he may extend the current rate for one more meeting, but
Sure.
all guidance is that it's going to drop.
Yep.
So, there's an element there of trying to time a market. That's pretty tricky to do. We can look at it in hindsight and go, that was great, and that was great, and that wasn't great. But I think the signals are there to make a purchase and then manage that, financing component. And if you take, if you've got an equity event, if you've got, stock packages coming, which is a lot of
Sure.
the buyer profile we deal with, then that can often change the financial picture as it relates to what kind of financing they have. And so, there's a lot going on in that. What is my mortgage? What makes sense in terms of my mortgage? But they're
Well,
taking
I don't
advantage
think
of it.
rates are ever going to drop below 5 or 4% again. I think
Yeah.
we've all learned a pretty expensive lesson about what that did. Matthew Gardner spoke about it on the show a little bit ago and mentioned that it was really kind of borrowing demand from the future.
Sure.
So you were actually more motivating the natural trends for consumers to step out and buy. Then these extra inflation and heightened mortgage interest rates might have delayed some potential buyers. I think, Michele, you were just saying that they've been sitting on their hands and maybe been wondering about when they should enter the market, and all they just wanted was the bell to ring, and now they're out talking to you and to others in our real estate community. So, I mean, do we feel like waiting to buy just might mean more competition and higher prices at this point?
I definitely think so. I think when we see, even at the first of the year, when we saw rates pull back, how many mortgage applications we saw, how
Yep.
many more buyers we saw come into the market. Buyers are very sensitive right now to even small increases in interest rates. We saw mortgage applications decline. Now we saw a little rate pullback, and so we're seeing mortgage applications increase. So there's a lot of sensitivity there. And the economists are saying when we see it pull back to 5%, there are going to be a flood of buyers coming into the market. And those buyers are going to be a combination of those sitting on the fence, that are still on the fence, still uncertain when we're sitting at the interest rates where we are today. But there's also going to be those sellers that become buyers that are willing, with the trade value from 2.5% or 3% to 5%, that they say, now I'm willing to sell.
Right.
So we're going to see, and that's a trade. So we're not seeing any net new inventory because they're going to be purchasing and selling.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not necessarily in our specific market, but I think we better buckle up. I think we're going to anticipate much greater demand when we see
Right.
those rates drop. So I would buy today without question.
Well, you saw a poke of that demand with your listing on Mercer Island, just one of your many. And I heard of another one just last week with one of our realtors that had 250 property tours. Now, obviously, there's a few neighbors that are poking around, but this was a view property around $3 million.
That's the whole zip code.
And it helped to be in a great zip code with a view. But guys, I mean, multiple offers, and obviously it went 10 or 15% above its asking price. I mean, how do you navigate this, Michele? I mean, what is the value of real estate today, and what would you say to an optimistic seller that says, well, it seems like the market's back, and how do I get pricing right? Do you intentionally leave a little on the table so you get multiple offers, or do you price it higher because they think it might be more aspirational?
Oh, pricing is probably, I was speaking with some other brokers, more than any time in my career, how sensitive buyers are to price. It's not rational. If you don't sell in the first week, you're going to be languishing on the market.
Wow.
And it is very sensitive. It's just the art of getting the price spot on is so critical right now. Buyers don't want to step in necessarily and compete. It's got to be prepped and presented properly. I think people think, brokers, sellers got lazy and didn't do the work they needed to do. It's critically important that it's showcased and positioned and marketed appropriately. I think that's critical. I'm now borrowing the help of other brokers to help, going back to those days of price opinions, to really help solidify the pricing, and having that dialogue before we go to market and sharing that dialogue with the seller. At the end of the day, the seller gets to make the decision, but we as brokers get to decide if we want to take an overpriced listing. And generally, it's very hard. I think you use the analogy of catching a falling knife. That is what happens when you overprice a property, and we can show statistically what happens. And even with a significant price reduction, it's hard to capture the attention of those buyers a second time around.
I mean, is it a day-old donut syndrome, Jay? I mean, if it sits around too long?
Yeah, I think a little bit. I think my observation is that, well-priced, well-presented properties will sell, right? Good
Okay.
quality product where a buyer can recognize that value is going to move. We also have a very well-informed buying population. They have the real estate market. You go back in the not too distant past was pretty opaque, and those days are long gone. So buyers know pricing, they know costing to be making updates or other kinds of investments in properties, and as they look at that total value to them, they know what they're looking at. Oftentimes, on the buy side, when I'm working with buyers, if they're focused on a particular neighborhood, they often know as much, if not a little bit more, about what's going on in that neighborhood because that's all they're looking at. And we've got, greater Seattle to be managing on a day-to-day basis.
It's a lot.
Which is helpful.
Yep.
It's great to have clients who are, as engaged and as informed. But they know when pricing is too high. They're willing to pay a fair price. They're willing to pay a premium or a competitive price because that's the nature of the market. But yes, day-old donut syndrome. It's hard to get somebody back to buy a day-old donut at any price.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let's talk about any of those listings that might be listing and lingering a little longer.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they're not a great opportunity.
No.
It just might be a different approach. Let's flip the switch and talk about buy-side representation.
Sure.
One way to unlock some of the demand out there might be to go and remind our consumers that are sitting in a home and they're desiring to make a move at some point. But boy, they got 40 years of life's collection. They might be timing with another life event and saying, at some point we got to figure out how to move from here and jump back into, maybe it's a downsize situation, let's say. But the guidance that you could provide them about making a offer today on a home that might have been sitting around for a little bit, is there an increase of contingent home sales right now? So what is, Michele, a contingent purchase opportunity? How would you describe that to our audience? And what is the advantage for a buyer to go and follow your direction if you're even successful in getting a contingent home sale accepted by a seller?
Mm-hmm. I'll use two different examples.
Please.
So over the last 2 days, I've met with two different buyers. One owns her house outright, has all of her equity locked up in there, would like to sell it and purchase a townhome is what she's looking to purchase. She doesn't have any income. She's a widow, and we need to transact. She needs to sell one house and buy another. So how are we going to do that?
Right.
We're looking at a new development.
Okay.
There are no sold units in that particular unit. They are going to need a cash buyer.
Okay.
They are going to want to cooperate with us. She's going to be able to negotiate on price. So we had that conversation about submitting a contingent offer. She was worried about it being bumpable. So when you extend a contingent offer, the seller has the right to bump your
That's
offer.
right.
But when you're dealing with a new development or a condominium, the developer is not motivated to bump a buyer that they have in place. They want to keep all the buyers that they have. So that's a really tremendous opportunity. And then another property I toured this morning with clients, again, it was not presented well, terribly. They hadn't taken the time to prep the property. It literally didn't have a sign. It had the post but no sign. It was ridiculous. And I said, it's overpriced.
Yeah.
Let it go through the offer review date. Let's not submit. We'll circle back around. We're getting ready to list their house. And they're risk adverse. And I said, let's shoot for a contingent offer. They can pay cash. So we've got that leverage behind us. But I said, let's go in to make you feel confident, and because they are so risk adverse, let's attempt to try this strategy, assuming they get no offers on their review date, and I don't think they will because it's overpriced and poorly presented. So
Right.
there's lots of opportunities, and every situation is unique, and strategizing with buyers as they're trying to decide, how do I sell the house and I've got kids and dogs or life situations or lack of income, you have to help counsel them through. And at the end of the day, I always tell people we're not decision makers. We can only advise.
Sure.
And then everybody's risk tolerance is entirely different. So somebody would want to just throw caution to the wind and own multiple properties and they could sleep well at night, and another one would be panicked And then
It's psychotherapy what you're doing
is,
here,
yeah.
Michele. I mean, I want to make sure the audience understands what a contingent offer is. So effectively, you have a home to sell, and there's a home you choose to buy. And you don't want to buy that new home until you sell your existing home. And so you make an offer to purchase at the new home. The seller has to accept it. And then if you're successful within a window of opportunity to sell your existing home, you basically perform on the purchase. And sometimes that's a double escrow, meaning that the two homes could close almost simultaneously. But you were saying, Michele, that the risk of being a contingent buyer is if someone else walks up and says, hey, I'm all cash and I want this home, you're out of luck. You know, but do you have sometimes the ability to perform before you're out of luck?
Yeah, so I love contingent offers. Hate the form sometimes, but love contingent offers because you're always in the driver's seat. So let's just use the example of the client that I said could pay cash. They are just risk adverse. So let's presuppose that we're now on the market. They haven't sold their house, but we've gotten good traction. They've built confidence, or they decide they just they'll waive all their contingencies and move forward. They would be in the driver's seat to make that decision after having more nights to sleep on it, understanding what's happening with their home now that it's on the market, more data, more intelligence, and then it's at the end of the day, it's the seller's, or in that case, the buyer and seller, their choice. They're in their driver's seat. So I love it. You can't always negotiate the most competitive offer when you're coming in contingent because there's risk to the seller, and risk equals money, time equals money.
Well, maybe they're not going to be as successful. I mean, they're also at risk of trying to sell a property, and they're like, boy, I thought we were going to get 1.8 for this, Jay, and we've been on the market for 90 days. You know, I'm still in a contingent offer to purchase over here. That seller's hoping it's going to go together too. Have you ever had an experience where, you know, you're selling for 1.7 and you're buying for, let's say, 1.4, but you realize the actual market value of the home you're selling might be more like 1.6 or 1.5. Have you ever been tempted to say, hey, I'll float down here if they revisit the price?
I don't think so.
I've done it.
Okay, which
You rascal.
I think there's, you know, if those were the circumstances, maybe what dovetails with that question and answer is that in trying to align contingent scenarios, literally the first quarter of this year, I found myself coordinating quite a bit more with the listing agents that we are working with, particularly if a property has been on the market for a while. There's a real element of trying to align interests there and going, here's what we can do and here's what you can do, and they might line up pretty well. And so at the end of the day, what you're managing for there is risk.
It's a partnership in a way.
Absolutely. Who's carrying the risk? Is it, does someone pay a risk premium in price does a buyer pay a risk premium in price in order for a seller to take that contingent contract? Occasionally.
Sure.
That's not out of the question, but that is often a comfortable position for a buyer to be in because they know that they will retain control and they can, put their home on the market with confidence that they know where they're going to go. So it's a lot of those aligning interests that, whether it's a seller in Woodinville or a developer downtown, aligning those interests is the whole contingency scenario that I think we're dealing with right now.
Well, I loved what you were saying, Michele, speaking back to development, and we're going to want to talk about where there's opportunities, but for sure a developer wants to get some cash flow back. They're ticking away at this mortgage interest with their construction loan, and they also want to set some benchmark values, right? And this is a townhome community that you're speaking of. I had a similar situation advising a developer at Infinity Shore Club. These are luxury condominium estates, and they're not for the faint-hearted. These are $1 million to $4.5 million. But do you realize that 4 out of the last 5 buyers that we are in process of closing with right now, all of them shared one trait? They all got early occupancy addendums. So literally they're able to move prior to closing, and several of them had contingent home sales too, and they're tearing up because they would never have been able to make this move, and the family that's helping, in one case an elderly parent, make the move to unlock them from 40 years of living in one capacity into a life-changing event, which we think is net beneficial, right? I mean,
Sure.
you can only carry that armoire around for so long. But there was so much anxiety about basically, removing a parent, a loved one, from a high maintenance domestic environment that might not even have the same kind of security or access to services as you can in a lock and leave condominium with one level with concierge services and such. But it's one of those kind of ringing moments for me right now where I think there's a lot of those type of buyers out there, and I just don't think families or the consumer themselves necessarily know how to navigate that kind of a thing. But in new developments, they're sitting on inventory. These buildings have been delivered. They want to accelerate sales, and they would probably take a contingent sale right now and also an early occupancy potentially.
Yeah, I think going back to what Jay said, though, it's about having the conversations right. So if you don't know or understand what the motivation is of the seller or the developer, you might just kind of throw your hands in the air and say, I can't move. I
Right.
have my home to sell. So if you get creative, and I just closed another sale where the selling broker, who this is her third deal, she's brand new, and she did a phenomenal job working collaboratively with me to bring the deal together, and the seller and the buyer. And we were a long ways apart when we started, and it was through building value, conversations, compromise, and she comes from a background in HR. She did a phenomenal job of working to bring it together, where had they simply just written the offer at the price at which we closed, it would have been a hard no. But the conversations that we had, the work that we did together, that's what really brought about the sale. And it doesn't mean when your client has a budget, there's ways sometimes to get creative, whether it's maybe a temporary rate buy down, which you can get from most developers. You just have to know to ask the questions, and you can approach it from a lot of different angles. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, I mean, we got you've got a question of price versus value. That can be a conversation. You've got short-term, long-term cash issues. I think in the scenario where the developer had an elderly purchaser, to me that's an operational issue, and we got a lot of those right now.
Sure.
And those are, once you distill them down, you can broker through that. You just got to get to what that real issue is, and get everyone to participate and understand what the risk is or isn't, and those are good deals to do.
So speaking of good deals,
Yeah.
where are the truffles right now? If we're going to root around, what do you find as a product type or a sub-market that you think is fundamentally well positioned to bounce off the floor at this inflection point? Who's going first?
I'll let Jay go.
Bounce off.
Oh, you chicken. You chicken.
Okay, well,
That was a curiosity.
Give me one, Jay. Where's the deals right now?
bounce off the floor, downtown condo market.
Oh,
Right,
you went
we're-
straight to downtown.
We had a couple of tough years, and there's no question that the downtown condo market, I think, is still perceived. There's a lag in perception. There's a lag in perception versus reality. The reality is a little more forward than I think the perception of what the general public thinks about
Right.
downtown urban cores.
Yep.
I live downtown. Things are great. Everyone's back.
Is it too soon for me to say chop chop? You should get down there and buy one.
No, and it's time to. It's a great time to buy downtown. I think in lots of metro markets, whether it's Seattle or Boston or San Francisco, there have been recent headlines about the resiliency of the city, and it's true.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally grew up in my career with downtown being my backyard, and we've represented thousands of units, and it really was difficult to watch.
Yeah.
And we've had other guests speak about the renaissance of downtown and condominiums. We have a conundrum. We have not broken ground on any new development since 2020, and you guys know how that works 5 years later. I mean, the dearth of new supply is a real issue. There'll be no deliveries in 2025 or thereafter unless we get some new projects in the ground. But the reality is they don't pencil. And we've had a pretty significant correction in the new construction realm of things, upwards of 25 or 30% omnipresent across all these projects. And that was a very important 25 or 30% because it was the difference between the developer going forward on a project or not. So really what's going to happen, Jay, is, we have the surrounding resale market has to float higher, and we're going to run out of inventory again. And we saw this after the Great Recession, the last time we had a housing correction. But supply and demand is never evenly distributed in these markets, and downtown Seattle, really took it in the face on a number of fronts, politically, socially, supply and demand imbalance. But now we're catching up. But there are opportunities to purchase well below replacement cost.
Yeah, certainly the case right now. I think let's say in the midterm, the downtown condo market is more acutely constrained in terms of supply because there is no new supply. You go to Kirkland, you go to Mercer Island, developers are still competing for new construction projects, even if it's infill. That is not a reality, and you can see a little bit further ahead downtown to confirm that is not a reality downtown. There just isn't anything in the pipeline.
Right.
That's buoying prices a little bit, which is good for sellers. But that lag in terms of perception and reality makes it a great time to buy.
Well, and if you wait for the headlines to ring the bell, you've probably missed it. I mean,
Sure.
I was looking this morning, and resale volumes, pending sales right now, are up 30% year over year. Kind of back to what Michele,
In the
you were
condo
saying,
market?
in downtown condo market.
So there were two at 1521 that just two condos in just as many weeks that went pending.
Yeah.
One of them had been on for 100 days.
Well, and those are higher end homes, and
Sure.
they don't happen as routinely.
Right.
And maybe you're seeing this in a couple of other markets, but I just have this vision of deer on a freeway. Like where you see one, you better slow down because there's probably more, right?
Yeah.
That's the risk.
Yeah.
You sometimes see a sale happen like waterfront. Like, is there a breakwater moment, Michele? Are you starting to see that on the east side, for instance, where you have a lot of listings and you know that market very well? But isn't this funny? Like, it can be nothing, then deal, and then what?
Yeah.
Deal.
Right.
What is going on there?
Well, I think I like to use the analogy of we're all like toddlers, right? So once we see somebody else want it, we're going to fight for it, right? So we're going to get in there. And people want to see a benchmark. So people are nervous to jump in when we haven't seen.
They don't want to
a lot
overpay.
No, they don't want to overpay. They don't know what the value is. And we haven't seen very many waterfront sales on the east side transact. So we don't know what the trade value is. And I even remember, Alan Pope unfortunately is no longer with us, but
Right.
talking with him about how to value properties and that we don't have the typical, number of sales to pull from to be able to quantify what a house is worth.
Sure.
So we can use other data points to help us determine that, but that's really hard for us as listing brokers to help determine how we're going to price these unique properties. And then going back to where do I think the deals are, I always focus on, as close in as possible and scarce assets. Scarce assets are view properties, waterfront properties, acreage properties, those things that cannot be duplicated. There's a finite number of those products. In the same way, there are a finite number of, penthouse units in downtown Seattle, things like that. So I always tell my clients, go after the scarce asset, go after the limited offering, the thing that makes that provides value long term.
I like that.
Not in the near
The
term.
scarce asset. I've always thought of them as lifestyle. So view, waterfront, and acreage have been our lifestyle properties in Seattle for a long time. But I can appreciate the
That's really
scarcity component. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's few of them.
There
right?
are.
So if you could capture
Yeah.
one of those, because they're just going to continue to appreciate in value in
Yeah.
any market wherever you're at. So
Yeah.
that's where I try to counsel people where they can. I also feel very strongly about staying as close into the core as you can.
Sure.
Downtown Bellevue, downtown Seattle, so you're not enduring that commute, which is not getting any better. So
Well, and it really won't. And I think we need to remember that, what's both a blessing and a curse in the state of Washington, specifically with growth management in King County, and, let's face it, with some NIMBYism within our markets, that it's very difficult and unlikely to get huge up zones or some, massive redevelopment opportunity, or we're not creating a new island in the center of, Lake Washington. So what you see is what you get for inventory, which makes it pretty scarce. And so, let's talk a little bit when something's not on the market. Let's go back to the buy side. You guys both work with Realogic Sotheby's International Realty. Wouldn't be the first time, you get a phone call or a referral and saying, hey, Mr. Big's coming in on his G6. He's got up to 30 million. He's looking for something. It's got to have a 70-foot, slip, and we want obviously low bank waterfront. where would you steer him and his family? And, what if that product isn't on the market? Can you guys go trophy hunting without any listings? I mean, how do you put that deal together?
In my experience, those clients tend to know exactly what they want. So initially, there's an exercise of confirming it exists. And in many cases, it does. Sometimes we just need to point out that there are only 5 docks like this on Lake Washington where you want to be, and 3 of them are owned by longtime legacy families, and 1 might be available, right? There's kind of a calibration or education component. And then I think that gets back to broker relationships and knowing who to talk to and making those calls.
I mean, can you penetrate those opportunities? I mean, Michele, I have this vision of you being on a stepladder looking over a hedge saying, hey, someone talk to me. I know you're a little more sophisticated than that.
I hope so.
How do you get those leads?
But you have to, I think a lot of it goes back to broker relationships, right? So we can pick up the phone. We know who are the heavy listing brokers in different marketplaces. So you're going to call and say, hey, I do have somebody coming in. This is what they're looking for. Do you have anything? And then it's kind of like playing telephone. So, and then they're going to share that information and somebody else will call, and then you play the connectors. So if somebody calls me and says, I'm looking for that, I'm going to be like, oh, I know who you should call because I just caught wind of this other opportunity that exists. So you should call that broker. I'm not afraid. If I don't have anything to offer, I'm happy to pass on the introduction to a broker that might have that opportunity. But it is about knowing who to call, when to call, how to package and present your buyer in that case to say this is the attributes they have. Maybe they can close quickly. They're cash buyers. They don't have a need to move here for the next 6 months. So that gives your client time to determine their exit strategy. Where are they going to go? And there's a lot of times when there are situations when we have clients that want to sell off market, which is really problematic in our market given that we cannot market those properties in any way, shape, or form. But there's a lot of deals to be had and just trying to plug in. And to Jay's point, knowing where that property might even exist. You don't send out a blanket letter to all the homeowners on Lake Washington. You do a very curated, you understand who sold that property, who has that relationship with that seller, and then find your way to have.
I think it's very much our market. There's Seattle's still a small town at the end of the day, right? There's a global gateway component, but provincial Northwest regionalism at the same time. So those relationships matter. On the flip side, this is, I guess today's Friday. We put this together on Monday or Tuesday. I was on the flip side of that. We had, I've got a client who owns a property that meets the specific requirements of a buyer. That buyer came to us, and we've now put them into contract with essentially right of first opportunity to negotiate to purchase that property when that property becomes available, which we know is going to be in the next 24 months. It's not time to negotiate the deal, but that buyer paid a fee to have that opportunity. It may not come together. I think it will. In all likelihood, it will. But it was a circumstance where there's a very high likelihood that buyer makes a lot of sense, and they will pay fair market value, and they just want to be first at the table, and a year from now we'll do the deal. So now we've got someone lined up for their property. It's just come together.
It's a daisy
pretty
chain
elegantly.
of opportunities. The traditional phone call comes from the 3Ds, right? It's the death, the divorce, or the dislocation. Hey, my job is moving me to New York, and I need to sell. But there's a 4th D, and there might be more you offer, but the 4th being discretionary. I mean, you guys do a lot of transactions, but they're not all for primary residences. So, I mean, could you share a story or two of having a conversation that led to a significant referral and something that our audience might remember, that, you're selling your backyard, but you're really selling the world as well. And Seattle is a great place to live, and let's be honest, it's a good place to leave too.
Sure.
So have you had much success in taking your existing clients locally and shopping for sea, sand, snow, sun, surf destinations?
Let's see. I think when you get to the 3, 4, 5 Ds, buying and selling real estate is always a secondary decision to something else, even if it's discretionary. right? There are either reasons that force a purchase or a sale, or it may be elective. We've had, and in those elective sales, I think that what I've seen, or even elective purchases, is trying to identify what fits best for the client. It might be they're shopping anywhere between Western Montana, Eastern Oregon, and the San Juans, and like they've got a Sandpoint, Idaho. Let's keep non-waterfront. Like they're trying to search for something that meets that lifestyle. We had a transaction 3 years ago where four Sotheby's International Realty agents, myself, Bozeman, Montana, Bend, Oregon, and Cindy Bond, formerly agent with the company in Idaho, all got together and we said, we know he's going to buy somewhere in one of these locations, and he's going to fly in and fly out in 24 hours. We've all got to do our job, and we're all in this together. So as a group, we tackled that together, and it was 100% open communication.
Interesting.
It was brilliant.
Was this a ranch property or something?
Yeah,
or?
big ranch. We all got a little piece of it, but the broker who
fascinating.
who did the deal got the lion's share of it, and it was exceptional cooperation.
What? So you competed from the markets, but you collaborated with finding the solution for the buyer.
It wasn't up to us to decide which market he was going to buy in, but he had very specific requirements and wanted to stay close
But that
to
is
Seattle.
customer service to that client.
It was great. So there's some of that discretionary stuff. That's a fun story. That's one to remember. I think as an agent, that was very collaborative and a lot of fun.
Well, it's buyers' desires, and Michele, jump in here. I mean, you have a buyer that thinks they want something, and I know on my personal home that you sold on Mercer Island waterfront, you converted that buyer from another piece of waterfront with another broker who you have a great relationship with. But I think sometimes it's our job to lead the conversation that might end up with a different transaction in a different market all entirely. I mean, any thoughts on that, Michele?
It happens all the time. And I think that, and I used to work a lot and still do on Bainbridge Island. And people would say they had a lifestyle consideration. I want good schools. I want this long of a commute. I would often introduce that as an alternative to them to say this might be good for you. But as if you're in the business long enough, they tell you what they want, and there's that, saying buyers are liars. There's actually a large degree of truth to that. It's not that they're lying, they just don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And our job is to educate.
Right.
So it's to educate that on different opportunities, different areas, neighborhoods, schools, whatever their criteria is. It might be that maybe they should consider, based on their criteria, Bend is a good alternative. So let's hook you up with a broker in Bend and hopefully share to some degree in that opportunity. So I'm a huge proponent. I've shared with brokers that when clients are looking on the east side in Washington Park and they wanted to have a neighborhood expert. So I approached a broker who's an expert in Washington Park, and because you had to be so timely, you had to know about off-market opportunities. And we said, wherever they buy, we'll split it 50-50.
Yeah. That is
because
fascinating.
we didn't know where they would land.
Yeah.
And we're both putting in a tremendous effort to sell them into that market, and in that case they ended up buying in Washington.
I so appreciate that about both of you in collaboration, and whether that's within our brand or externally. I just had this thought go through my head with all these seagulls going, mine, 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 mine. Have you ever seen that on that show? Well, what that was what a lot of mentality is with real estate agents sometimes, which is, this is my buyer and I am going to sell this home to this buyer. Probably not going to work out very well for you. So your collaboration being open, I mean, really it's a lot of gratitude, goes a long ways in this industry, and no wonder you're both so successful.
For me, it's a way to, in many regards, it's a way to make a sale, right? You're gonna generate that purchase, and you've got to do the best for the client. You can't leave them hanging. You can't, if you know your blind spot or you know your bandwidth, you're going to need somebody else. If you know exactly what they want and it's outside of your little realm, that's the way to shameless plug for the company, but serve them under the same umbrella. It's just, I think it's great.
Let's talk about. Go ahead, Michele.
I think too, if you really, if you perceive your job, which I know we both do, that we're acting in the best interest of our clients. And I had a call this morning with a client, and he was saying, well, why can't you list my property in Gig Harbor? It's a beautiful waterfront property. And I said, because I don't know Gig Harbor. Love to list it. I can co-list it. I can refer you to somebody who would be a phenomenal partner within the umbrella of Sotheby's International Realty. But I would be doing you a disservice to list your property as the primary listing broker in Gig Harbor. I don't know the market. So
Let's talk about where the market's going next and some final thoughts on this. And I'm noticing a little silver on top of that head of yours there, Jay.
Quite a bit.
And I've found that myself as well. And I don't notice any on Michele for some reason.
I'm ageless.
But, you know, the silver tsunami is coming.
Yeah.
I mean, trillions of dollars of transactions. And I had Kurt Owen from UBS Wealth Management on the show, and it was just fascinating to listen to the statistics. And boy, oh boy, the kind of trust that you guys earn with your clients could last a lifetime, could be a legacy, could become part of your own retirement, right? Get it right. But there's going to be a lot of generational wealth transfer. A lot of that is here, guys. I mean, you think about the tech titans and these stock values with what's going on with AI right now. I mean, isn't Microsoft peaking at all value? I mean, isn't that going to just create a wealth effect? And do you feel that now in the real estate market? And what do you anticipate to happen? I mean, some of these first-time buyers, Michele, they might be going straight from University of Washington into a $40 million waterfront property.
I've shown my 20 million
great.
to 22-year-olds. I'm not kidding. Yeah, and there's we're seeing a lot of that transfer of wealth. And if nothing more, we're going to see it in the form of parents helping their kids buy a house in whatever fashion that is. It could be a couple $100,000, could be a portion towards their down payment. I have friends that are helping their kids do that right now because, frankly, it's very difficult for anybody as a first-time home buyer with a standard, non-tech job. Mostly they're not there yet. So we're seeing a lot of that. And how do we assist and how do we strategize? And that's really where the strategy comes in because, I have friends that are thinking about helping their daughter who's not yet engaged to her boyfriend, and they just thought, well, we'll just give them money. And I said, whoa, who are you giving money to? Are you giving it to the daughter? Are you on title? Are you intending to give this to the hopefully future fiance? So it gets very complex, and that's where we have other professionals we can loop in to make sure that they're making decisions that are in their best interest, because at the end of the day, we know what the goal is. It's to help them get their kid into a home or a nicer home. Maybe it's just that they want their standard of living to be a little nicer than it is.
Well, and you're a CPA, former CPA, and you understand tax consequence and what's happening in the state of Washington, and if this repeal with the capital gains tax happens, it's on the ballot. We'll find out in November, but it's chased away a little bit of wealth. I mean, famously, Mr. Bezos is now selling stock from his front lawn in Miami instead of Washington State. Sure. So that 7% tax has some capital flight, let's be honest. Do you think that there could be a direct result after November if this repeal happens? I mean, what do you think's likely in that situation? If will that keep more people here? Will it attract more people here?
It would certainly. Listen, people, was it inertia, momentum? People like to stay where they're at, right? And the tax, the capital gains tax has generated enough inertia so there's some outbound momentum.
Interesting.
I think if that is repealed, then that settles that. People are going to stay where they're at, which is going to be great for the state. I think the flip side of that is, well, does that keep some inventory locked in that would otherwise be freed up if people were moving out of state? Perhaps. I don't know on balance what's the best option. So we'll see. I think on the silver tsunami, I like to think of it as maybe waves or ripples that will move through our market over the next, let's say, 10 years. And that contains, that tsunami or wave contains several different kinds of, sub-markets. One is their children, right? That won't necessarily show up as a boomer making a move. That's going to show up as a 35-year-old making a big first-time home purchase.
Right.
And there are, questions that we get are, what are the tax advantaged ways to do that? I think that we'll see second home markets, or second homes in Island County or let's say Chelan. We've got questions there about how to transfer those properties, and either one will stay in the family and it won't come to market. And then we get into things like, I don't know, personal residence trusts, or what are the ways to transfer those properties effectively, or decisions to free that up. And those are the conversations that we're having right now with older generations that then get back to where do they make their move. So if they can pull Lake Chelan, if they can pull $2.5 million off the table in Chelan right now, then they may make that move to Edmonds
Right.
without selling their primary residence. So there's a lot wrapped up in, I think, that greater conversation of the silver tsunami that offshoots into a lot of what we've already talked about. Interest rates, the importance of it, the downtown condo market and single floor living, inbound, outbound through the state. It's a big umbrella, big realm.
Well, I mean, you guys are such luminaries in the industry, and it's a great reminder that there's a lot to unpack. This is not just about, posting a photo on the MLS or sticking a sign in the yard, right? I mean, this is some complicated considerations, and a lot of it is also dealing with human emotions. And I know, Michele, you were saying earlier that one of the most challenging things you're dealing with right now is you're talking to would-be sellers that even in the case of divorce are living together because they're no longer in love with each other, but they sure love that mortgage rate.
I mean, to me, it's the most ludicrous thing that anybody could say. I love my mortgage. I mean, I love my fiance. I love my kids. I love my dog. But I don't love my mortgage. I love my house.
Yeah.
But and I'm also a little fickle. I might not love my house next week. There might be some pain point as
You just
life
bought it.
changes. I did. No, I love my house. I buy houses all the time. But I love to transact on my own. But I think it's really nonsensical that people are saying this. I mean, I appreciate that you have the financial benefit, but if you don't love your house, if you are divorced and sharing your house with your ex-spouse or soon-to-be ex-spouse, that's a really uncomfortable place to be. If you have an additional child or children and you're squished into this little place in a 2.5% mortgage, you might want to consider a different alternative. If you are, the empty nesting and now you've got this big house that you're rattling around in and it doesn't make sense for you anymore, you should probably consider downsizing. And the point is to have an advisor that can help you strategize about how to make that change and make that change effectively. And sometimes, I just met with a client last week, the right decision in the scenario that she was going through was to stay in her house. And that was a divorce situation, but the conversation was around, I could tell her to list it and she would trust me. But I said, I really think once we do the math and run the numbers, it would be to her disadvantage to sell the house based on that. So sometimes it's right to stay.
And isn't it true that if you were to make a gift to your spouse for his or her equity in a home during a divorce situation, that is actually a tax-free situation versus the capital gain that would be otherwise suffered if you both sold, right?
Correct.
So that could mean that your basis might not be the same as the one that stays in the home as if you put it on the open market, but you can kind of factor that in, that the difference between paying no tax and capital gains can be a factor in agreeing to separate.
Tremendously. And in this scenario, there was both parties wanting to keep an equity interest in the house, and there's a lot of reasons why that doesn't work long term.
Yeah, sure.
And so I suggested maybe the soon-to-be ex-husband to take a debt position versus an equity position in the house. He's getting paid, a fairly significant rate of interest to keep a debt position in the house. And then the conversation, so when she decides to remodel the kitchen or whatever, it's complicated. What sounds like a good idea, let's co-own this property together, generally not a good idea.
We could do a whole series on divorce. I just had a scenario where there was a little bit of a complicating factor that only one party was on the mortgage.
Oh, okay.
And so in order for the other party to keep the property, that would require a refinance. And as you go from two incomes to one income, just the complexities there, the outcome was the same. It made sense for one to keep the house. When I hear you say that you have clients who love their mortgage, what I hear is we have clients who love the value of that mortgage.
Right.
And often our conversation walks them through their other values and identifying what type of real estate, at what price, with what characteristics is valuable enough for them to move on. I think a lot of what we do often gets distilled down, reduced to the ridiculous. 2.5%. Well, there's more to life than 2.5%. And as families grow, as things happen, those values shift a little bit.
It's almost like they don't think they could ever do better than that. So maybe that's what they're in love with.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't want to let it go. And last time I checked, you can't transfer a mortgage with a purchase.
Yeah.
So if you're ready to let go,
Mm-hmm.
and you might have enough equity in your home that you don't even care that you're buying into,
Yeah.
you know, a different mortgage environment, right? This is that whole FOMI, you know, fear of mortgage interest. But some people downsize and they're all cash. So let's talk about this as a conversation, because, you know, timing the market as a buyer or as a seller doesn't always work out, but sometimes it's obvious. Like, you know, if there's a tremendous opportunity to buy in a destination market, you know, let's just say Palm Springs. I mean, I had heard that that's a popular market here, that I guess there's some changes going on with Airbnb, and there might be a higher volume of sellers now, and it's also at the end of a season, right? So depending on what's happening with snowbirds, it might be a window of opportunity for you to jump down there and go and, you know, save 15% or 20% on a great transaction. So you might not be ready to make that full-time move, and you're going to stay in your home up here, but maybe you'll take a, you know, HELOC or something on your home, and you decide to go buy it for the future. And likewise, another scenario might be, you know, you're going to downsize in the next 5 years. And Jay, you were just saying, I mean, they're selling beautiful condominiums, brand new ones, for less than $1,000 a square foot in downtown Seattle. So why wouldn't we just go ahead and buy that now, and then stick a renter in there, or one of your kids going to UW or something? Nice dorm room, by the way.
Great dorm room.
And then just wait for the occupancy, because maybe now isn't the right time to unload the Broadmoor Country Club property, right? So have you had any experience in dangling bracelets on the arm of a would-be buyer, saying, hey, you know, I know you guys have been talking about a second home, and I got to tell you, I'm excited about what's happening in Clay Elum right now. If you want that mountain home, let's go talk to those guys at Trailside, or let's go down and get that deal in Palm Springs. Are you an originator of demand? Have you done that successfully?
Well, I mean, I practice ninja, right? So when I'm calling people, I'm talking about family, occupation, recreation, dreams. So I'm in that order. So how's the family, you know, how's it going at the workplace? What have you guys been doing?
Well, you
for
make it sound
fun?
so formulaic.
Yeah.
No, but it just comes but it's a very easy way to
Fluid,
have a
yeah.
conversation to understand when they're like, yeah, you know, gosh, at some point we'd love to I mean, I can speak for me personally, like I'd love to buy that vacation home at some point down the road. I personally haven't defined where that is.
Okay.
But you know, to start to have the conversation, to introduce, to say, well, have you guys thought about, are you thinking about Palm Desert? Are you thinking about Scottsdale? Where are you dreaming?
Right.
Basically, where are you kind of forecasting your life moving forward? Are you thinking about Hawaii? Are you thinking about destination ski resorts? So absolutely, and you can really help them understand. And then if you can share, I mean, I'm at that stage of life. If you can share, gosh, we're thinking about it. You know, is there anywhere cool? And I really don't want this specific place, but maybe this other place, or yet undiscovered places. And trying to, you know, how do we help them find that, and then connect the dots within Sotheby's International Realty? So,
well, we're certainly blessed with the brand, given that we have offices in 80 different countries and territories, and you know, that kind of community that you spoke of networking sure makes it fun, and you can write off a lot of trips, can't you, as you're doing your research for your next destination market. Any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience? I'm really looking for a nugget of wisdom about a trend that you're seeing right now that you think is game-changing if it was only more on the minds of more agents or more consumers. The media, when they talk about it in 6 months, Michele, it's already going to be a trend that's come and gone. What do you think is bubbling up beneath the surface right now?
A trend that's bubbling up before this, and I didn't prepare for this, so I have no idea. I'm going to come off the cuff, but I certainly think a trend with, you know, the new House bills with the ADUs. I think making an
House
investment.
Bill 1110.
Just in terms of making an investment with properties that you could build an ADU on, and thinking about the opportunities, with even going back to the silver tsunami of people wanting to cohabitate in a close-knit property with their family. So I think as we think about maybe a vacation home, that's not on everybody's, you know, it doesn't fit everybody's budget. But if you think about building an ADU on a property that might be where maybe the kid lives right now,
Sure.
and then you could flip it and reverse and the kids get to live there long term as you age in place in your single level ADU that happens to reside in the backyard. So I think getting creative about thinking about that, investment opportunities, I think that's a trend that certainly is going to survive much longer than 2024. And a great opportunity from an investment perspective as well.
Thanks for that. I mean, we had Tadashi Shiga on the show, and we were speaking about that House bill. And, all those municipalities are due to deliver those guidelines by the end of this year. And you should be able to pull permits by the summer of 2025. And that's across the state. And it's a big deal.
It's a huge deal.
And you can downsize on your own lot effectively and then sell the big house or rent it out. And then there's your cash flow to go buy the place in Palm Springs.
We're still doing that on Pine Lake right now, out in Sammamish. Built the house, beautiful house, big ADU in back, and he's just waiting to. He's 82, and will split out the back, sell the big house, or keep some kind of a remainder in the back.
Final thought, Jay? I
think the you talk about Palm Springs and changes here. We talk about HB 1180. We talk about Suncadia. What I see there are changes in zoning and regulations often create what I call wipeouts and windfalls. When the Growth Management Act was put in place in 1989, major wipeouts on one side, major windfalls falls on the other side of a line you can draw on a map. It is on a map. Similar scenario with parcels that can sufficiently hold an ADU or be parceled out. And then actually making a market. What's happening in Suncadia is, a doubling of the market there. They will make that market.
You're speaking of Clay Ellum.
I am.
And
yes.
the Trailside Homes with their Adara Master Plan community.
That is a whole new market.
Yeah.
And those are where opportunities lie, right?
Yep.
They've got great inventory. It will all be absorbed over time. But I look at where will wipeouts and windfalls occur?
I'm using that one.
And then where it's often regulation.
Well, the policy changes, they do have
Yeah.
impacts, positive and negative sometimes. And I think
Yeah.
speaking with market luminaries like yourself is a great way to inspire our audience to inquire about, where to make the most. Where's the market going next so we can get there first? But with that, Michele Schuler, Jay Kipp, appreciate having you on the show. That's a wrap for this episode of Market Perspectives. I'm Dean Jones, your host. We'll see you next time. Make sure to follow us on social media, share a comment, and we'll see you next time.